think. What is the protagonist escaping from? These are all pretty bad. Just got to be something in there, though. So I've come up with several here for possible conflicts that he could be escaping from. And a couple of them are too close to things that I've been reading and watching recently. I'm just going to eliminate those right out because I don't want to get into the mindset of following in the footsteps of someone else necessarily. So I'm going to say just straight up survival tale a la trying to find air to breathe and a place to live. We'll scratch that out because I am reading The Martian and it's fantastic and there's no way. Let's say this protagonist is human. I'm not going to have that human interacting with like an enemy nation. I don't want another war in a book because in the book that I'm writing currently, there is kind of a war going on. So I don't want to do another war story. And that means this is out. Because this is aliens here with war, but this might work. That's not going to work. Kind of good.
There always comes a point in every story where you have to experiment and decide if you're going to go this way or that way. And so I decided to try this way and wrote a couple chapters, and it just didn't work. It's hard for anyone to admit that the path that they first took isn't the right path. The only way you get better is to try something new to have an improvement. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So this chapter that I am going to delete is a fine chapter. There's nothing wrong with this chapter. It's 5, 6, 7 pages, something like that. And it's a lot of writing, and sometimes it hurts to get rid of all this writing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in another document and save it, and maybe some of it will show up a little later, maybe some of it won't. But for the betterment of my story, of my original story, this section has to go. So I just copied and pasted it over to a new document. I will save this new document, and I'll just call it a junk chapter. So I just got rid of chapter 20, so I'm going to start chapter 20 again.
I'm often photographing the amazing world, right? And that feeds my poetry. And I began recently to put those two things together, where I've been creating what I call pictopoems, which are inspired by the Native American pictograph, and also by ledger art. The Wisconsin Poet Laureateship, which was such an amazing gift, has also been a new opening of relationships and also, putting me in other places that are inspiring to me.
We're gearing up for our big end of the year event that starts in November. And so I need to think a little bit about how I'm going to introduce the charity this year. How am I going to, write that kind of inaugural blog? I have to kind of sell the concept of Heifer International, which is the charity we raise money for. I need to kind of talk to them about that and explain why it's an awesome thing and why they do good work. Ultimately, what I'm doing is I'm engaging in a piece of persuasive writing here. I'm trying to say, whatever it is you would like to do, here are options for you to be involved. I don't know if this is concrete enough to really appeal to somebody who doesn't know anything about Heifer. A donation of $72 will give people training and tools they need. That's nice, but it's not really concrete. It boosts the productivity of their small farm, conserves soil, irrigates crops. And all of this is good, but it's not tangible. I gotta sell this. Here's irrigation pumps. And this is a tangible thing. So even if you're like, boy, I don't really think, a lot of people are vegetarians. They're like, and they're like, why would I donate money so that somebody could eat a goat? That's not gonna be appealing to them. And even though I don't lean in that direction, I got to respect that that's the place that my audience is coming from. So I got to give those people a different entry point into this concept of the charity. And anybody can understand how important having water is. It's like, here's $120, and this will provide an irrigation pump. And I'm going to grab this link. I'm going to tuck that in for future use. And again, geeks are smart. They will understand what a long-term solution this is. One of the things I'm just going to make a note to myself here about education, sanitation, conservation, working with local ecology.
I'm co-authoring a book with a good friend of mine called John Spencer for Solution Tree, and it's a new series coming out next year called Making Schools Different. It's not just a philosophy-based book, but it's really a practical book on what we can do right now, changing the way our students experience the literacy instruction that they're receiving in schools. I often tell my students, if they're stuck, just write something, because if you write something, you can go back and change it. But if you have a blank page, you can't change anything. To get that horrible first whatever it is out of us, and then we can get into the zone. So I've been working on this book for about 2 or 3 weeks now, and when I first started it, I got really lost, and it had to do with the title that we had for the book, and we were calling it The Future of Literacy, and I realized that I didn't want to write a technology literacy book. That wasn't what I was looking for. I had to go back to the basics, and so what I'm looking at right now is simply our major branch of topics as far as what is the flow for the whole book series, which is making schools different. And so just kind of keeping my purpose in mind as I go in and write. I start a very linear introduction and then the various chapters. And then last night I started actually working on the conclusion, even though I wasn't there, but it was because inspiration struck. I always start by reading a little bit of what I wrote before so that I can pick up the thread. I am working on a section right now that has to do with authentic audience in our classrooms, and so that's where I'm picking up the pieces, and again, just keeping the framework in mind as far as what can I say that will bring authentic audience into classrooms really easily, and also how is that different from what we're doing right now.
I'm working on a book, it's a biography for kids, again, upper elementary, middle school aged kids, of a man named Yip Harburg. And Yip was a lyricist back in the 30s and 40s, and most famously known for doing all the lyrics to the movie Wizard of Oz.
The thoughts you'd be thinking you could be another Lincoln if you only had a brain.
In general, when I'm working on a book, it's at least a year. It seems like 2 to 3 is, but from actual idea to publication is more realistic. There's writing, followed by rewriting, followed by, I think of it as revision. It's kind of after you've got the basic pieces done, you revise, and then editing is really kind of the last step in the way I think about it. I'm past the point now of I'm going to fix a paragraph or take out a chapter. This is really the last step.
And at this point I'm looking for the small things that slip through. So, for example, here in this sentence, I have a question about whether I need a dash.
Today, I'm working on this play that I've been working on for over a year. There's a playhouse in Chicago that's interested in working with me, and so I've got some time before I have to do my edits on the next novel, and just trying to stay busy with the project. So yeah, this play I think is going to be called Milk and Sawdust, and it's about 2 couples that recently had kids and entering their sort of early to mid 30s, and a set of like marital challenges that sort of happens at that time in people's life. I got some great feedback from kind of a new friend in Chicago who's a director. The one bit of feedback that I got from this director was that the play just wasn't long enough, and I hadn't explored these characters long enough. So now I'm in this sort of phase where I'm trying to, it's sort of crazy, like these are just imaginary people, but I've now spent 2 or 3 months just trying to get inside their head and figure out what their lives are like and what their frailties are, and it's exciting. It's exciting to do something a little different, and So when I'm writing, I listen to jazz or classical music. Right now I'm listening to this guy named Colin Stetson, who was up here for the Eau Claire Music Festival, and he's a saxophonist. And there's one track that I've been listening to intensively, and when I say intensively, I just listen to the same track literally hundreds of times in a row or whatever. It just becomes sort of like a buffer between me and the telephone ringing or the doorbell ringing or my children if they're around. And it just allows me to get into a frame of mind where I'm like both enjoying the music and thinking about the music, but also totally focused on writing.
But right now I'm writing a memoir I have a contract with the Historical Society Press called Once a Professor. And they wanted me to write about the years when I was teaching. I taught all through the civil rights, Vietnam, environmental protest movement. I've got more stories than you can imagine. Tear gas twice in my office in one day, for example, in Ag Hall during that time. Well, as I've got most of the manuscript finished, but I'm now working on the last chapter. For every book that I work on, I keep a notebook for that book, and this is the one on Professor. And in this notebook, this is how I can work on 4 books at the same time. I keep track of where I am, what I'm thinking. It's got everything under the sun in it. What I'm thinking, what the outline is. I put in the mind maps. It's just a day-by-day record. So I've been writing full time now for a long time. So it's been great fun, and I've stuck to a theme mostly of being a rural historian and a storyteller and story writer. I'm a firm believer in the power of the interest in and what can be accomplished with a story.
The first time I write, I just write everything. Everything I can think on the topic. I call it free-flowing writing. So my subject is African Americans, Wisconsin, and the future. So again, I just let all of my thoughts flow out. I don't care how it looks on the page. I don't care about the spelling. I don't really care about which words I use. I'm more or less letting my creativity out, and sometimes I surprise myself about what I really think. Because even as I'm writing this, I feel like emotions are surfacing when I ask questions and think about what might Wisconsin be like in 100 years. And then for the second draft, that's when I start looking at poetic devices. How can I shape it into a poem? I start then looking at how it looks on a page. I start thinking about what form it will take. I really like narrative poetry that tells a story.
I'm working on a story about a project-based learning academy within Neenah High School. It's called Arate Academy. I just interviewed the teachers this morning. So I have quite a bit of the interview transcribed, and I'm gonna start writing the story. One of the first things that I try to do is write the lead paragraph of my story first to give direction and kind of start the process. One of the key things about a lead is that it has to hook the reader and it has to be interesting. Because this is more of a feature-y type lead, I get a little more license to be creative and come up with something. And the reason I decided to start writing right now is because I think I found my lead. One of the teachers said, if you walk past our door and learning is going on, it looks messy. There's not kids sitting in rows. It's kids figuring things out on their own, and they're everywhere. So I thought that was a really good way to draw people in and then dive into the project-based part. So that's where I'm gonna start.